Oh, hello. Hi, I'm Sean Griffin. Welcome to Morning Cup of Context. If you haven't already, I've got your context mugs. They're, they're in the link below at the store. You guys are welcome to check them out if you want. Thanks for joining me this morning. I wanted to address something that I've seen taken out of context often, and it's the passage from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 9. Let's look at it real quick. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. Now I put in parentheses here at the bottom that this was from the NASB version, which is from the Masoretic text. The big contention that's highlighted in this passage is this phrase, his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. This is often taken out of context to try to say that Yeshua, the Son of God, is actually just Yahweh in a fleshly body. This is done by modern versions of Hebrew roots oneness doctrine, where they basically say that the Yahweh of the Old Testament has always been Yeshua. It was never the Father. It was just they just called him the Father, but it was never the Father, Creator, Almighty, the Most High. But it was actually the Son going by a different name. And then when he became incarnate in the flesh as Jesus, as Yeshua, he adopted that name, right? But is that what the prophecies actually say? Now, as for the identity of who the Almighty is, who's often called the Most High, I've already covered that in this video here. But this video, this thing I've seen being taken out of context from Isaiah 9, is about the Son himself, a prophecy about Jesus, the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, being sent as the Son of God to become the King. So this passage here in the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew translations from the 8th century AD, that has become the modern English translations and what we call the KJV, the NASB, the New Living Translations, things like that. But there's a different translation here in the Septuagint. The Septuagint was Hebrew translators who created a Greek translation about 2,300 years ago. And during the days of Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, he commissioned these Hebrew scholars to make a Greek version of the Old Testament. And when they translated Isaiah in this particular passage, here's what they actually said for this moment here, that his government shall be great, and of his peace so shall be no end. It shall be upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom. But if you look up above it, it says he's called messenger of great counsel, for I will bring peace upon the princes and health to him. So this translation, even though it does say that to the Son the government will be upon his shoulders, it doesn't call him eternal God it doesn't call him mighty God or eternal Father. Now, many of you already know that the term God in Hebrew is the term Elohim, and it doesn't necessarily just speak about Yahweh only, right? It's used of Yahweh, it's used of the Son, it's used of angelic beings. And so this is just a common Hebrew word, and it can be used in a plural sense very often. It just depends on the context. But aside from that, many people take this statement here from the Masoretic, which says that he will be called Eternal Father, and they think, oh, see, he's Yahweh, who's the Father, right? Now, I agree that Yahweh is the Father, but this description here in Isaiah 9:6 about the king that Yahweh will set up as ruler on David's throne, peace forevermore on the earth, is talking about the Son. And I'm going to prove that through context of Scripture. So that not only does a different translation, the Septuagint, not even include those descriptions, but let's go further into Isaiah 22. So this is the same author, right? Isaiah chapter 9. Well, we go a few chapters later to Isaiah 22, and we're going to get the same descriptions about a king. And so here it is in verse 20 through 22, and it says, it shall come to pass in that day that I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah. I will clothe him with my robe and strengthen him with, I will clothe him with your robe and strengthen him with your girdle. I will commit your government into his hand, and he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. And the key of the house of David will lay upon his shoulders, and so he shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open. So here is, in the context of someone being made king, he's being called a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and Judah. So the juxtaposition here is that when Yeshua, the Son of God, is set up as king over the earth on the throne of David, at his second coming, that he is going to be an eternal father, meaning if the idiom father is being used for a kingship and a ruler, which we'll prove here with several scriptures, it's right that we would call it eternal. Like that position of being a father over the people, when Yeshua reigns, will be eternal because he will never step down from that position. So this is why in this moment here, Eliakim is not being called an eternal father, because at some point he's going to die a natural death. Isaiah 22 in the Septuagint even says this. Since we initially compared the Septuagint, I just thought for due diligence I would show you guys that the Septuagint is consistent with the Masoretic in this translation in this passage later on in Isaiah, and it continues to use the same verbiage of a father as a ruler over the people. But let's go into other examples in the Old Testament. Job chapter 29, we're going to read about how Job was actually a ruler over the people. And this is important for us to know. It's in the language. You just have to understand how the language is used according to the Torah and according to how God viewed rulers over the people. So here in verse 1, it says, And Job again took up his discourse, and he said, Oh, that I were as in the months gone by, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone over my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, and I was in the prime of my days, when the friendship of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, and my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in butter, and the rocks poured out for me streams of oil, when I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square. So I just want to stop real quick, because at this last verse in verse 7, when he says, when I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square, this is a common term for, in the Old Testament, as they had the way their cities set up, the rulers and the judges would sit near the gates. They would call it, go sit out by the gate. You were a part of the ruling class. You were the leaders over the people. You ruled and you judged at the city gates. That was very common. And that's the expression that they referred to it as. We'll keep going here in verses 8 through 14. It says, The young men saw me and hid themselves. The old men arose and stood. All right, this is addressing different age groups and how they revered him in his leadership role and respected him. The princes stopped talking and put their hands on their mouths. The voice of the nobles was hushed. Their tongue stuck to their palate. For when the ear heard, it called me blessed. And when the eye saw, it gave witness of me, because I delivered the poor who cried for help and the orphan who had no helper. This is the requirement and responsibility of a ruler, is that they would deliver the poor and help the orphan. This is a part of Torah, Deuteronomy 15. So this is, as many of you guys already know, if you're watching my channel, I emphatically explain that God's instructions for living, what he calls his Torah, it applies to all of mankind. It was made with a special circumstantial covenant here with Abraham's descendants, and that's how he separated people unto himself. But as Noah got off the boat and the earth was repopulating, they were all given the commandments of God as much as they knew at that time, to follow righteousness, to do good behavior upon the earth. And Job would be a descendant of Noah. In fact, the Septuagint translation actually tells us he was a descendant of Esau, and he was actually an Edomite king. So this is consistent with the language that we're reading right here, where he's talking about in his place of honor and rulership, how he judged fairly and how people respected him while he was in that position of authority. I'll keep reading here. It says, But the blessing of the one ready to perish came upon me, and I made the widow's heart sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. This is more rulership descriptions. Here in the last few passages, Job 29, 15 through 22, it says, I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I investigated the case, which I did not know. I broke the jaws of the wicked and snatched the prey from his teeth. And then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is ever new with me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. To me they listened, and they waited, and they kept silent from my counsel. After my words they did not speak again, and my speech dropped on them. So this is him, again, explaining how people revered him and respected him. And of course, if you have read the story of Job, in the book of Job, you realize that he went from a place of honor and wealth and distinguishment to losing all that, to being reprimanded by his friends, and then at the end of the book, Yahweh restores everything to him twice as much, and so he is blessed again. At the beginning here in verse 15, it says, I was a father to the needy. I investigated the case, which I did not know. So after 14 verses of him explaining him being a ruler amongst the people, then he calls himself a father to the needy and investigating cases, which is the which is what kings and rulers would do. You guys remember the famous story with Solomon and the two women that brought forth the dispute. They were both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. And Solomon had a clever way of figuring out who was the actual mother and who was lying. So he was investigating a case as a ruler. He was solving disputes. This was what Moses is doing back in Exodus 18. This is a common idea for rulers of the people who's considered a father over the people in authority. Here in Genesis 45, 7-9, we see Joseph using the same language. He says, God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord over all his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry, and go up to my father, and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me, and do not delay. So in the moment where Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, after 20 years, and they realize he is alive, and he's trying to tell them to go back to his father, Jacob, and give the good news that he's alive, and then bring Jacob down to Egypt with him. And in this dialogue, he's telling his brothers, God has made me a father, not just to Pharaoh, but a lord and ruler over all of Egypt. It's the same context of rulership, kingship, authority. This is the same idiomatic expression that we see in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7 of Yeshua, the Son of God, being placed by Yahweh on the throne of authority and rulership and being called a father to the people. So here in Psalm 2, we have another quick example of this. It says, He who sits in the heavens laughs. Yahweh scoffs at them, and then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury. And he says, But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Now I want people to stop real quick and take quick note that this is a dialogue here that's happening between two people. So we just had Yahweh say this, I've installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain, right? And then we have the Son responding back to Yahweh and says this, I will surely tell of the decree of Yahweh. Yahweh said to me, You are my son, and today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Now therefore, O kings, show discernment, take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship Yahweh with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he may not become angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. So as the psalmist is describing and citing what two different people are saying, he says the Father said this and then the Son said this in response. And then he goes on to elaborate about how the Son will rule and how people need to, show respect to him, right? So we see Paul affirm the psalm that we just read in Acts chapter 13. And here in verse 30 through 33, he says this, But God raised him from the dead, and for many days he appeared to those who came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, the very ones who are now his witnesses to the people. And we preached you the good news of the promise made to the fathers, that God, Yahweh, has fulfilled this promise to our children, and that Yahweh raised up Yeshua, as it is also written in the second psalm, You are my son, today I've begotten you. So we have confirmation in the New Testament that this Psalm 2 passage is Yahweh talking to his son, who he puts in authority and rulership as king. We even get this also expressed to us in the Book of Enoch. 1 Enoch 62, verse 1 through 5, it says, And thus the Lord commanded the kings and the mighty and the exalted and those who dwell on the earth, and said, Open your eyes and lift up your horns, if you are able to recognize the elect one. And the Lord of spirits seated him, who? The elect one. Seated him on the throne of his glory, and the spirit of his righteousness was poured out upon him, and the word of his mouth slays all the sinners, and all the unrighteous are destroyed before his face. And there shall stand up in that day all the kings and the mighty, and the exalted, and those who hold the earth, and they shall see and recognize how he, the Son, sits on the throne of his glory, and the righteousness is judged before him, and no lying word is spoken before him. Then shall pain come upon them, as on a woman in travail, and she has pain in bringing forth when her child enters the mouth of the womb, and she has pain in bringing forth. And one portion of them shall look on the other, and they shall be terrified, and they shall be downcast of countenance, and pain shall seize them, when they see that Son of Man sitting on the throne of his glory. And verses 6 through 9 in the same chapter of Enoch, it says, The kings and the mighty and all who possess the earth shall bless and glorify and extol him who rules over all, him, Yeshua, the Son of Man, the Son of God, who was hidden for, and it's going to explain the whole term who was hidden, for from the beginning the Son of Man was hidden, and the Most High preserved him in the presence of his might. These are two people being spoken about. So from the beginning, the Son was existent with the Father before he became incarnate through Mary as a human. He was in Elohim. He was a spirit being. He was above the firmament with the Father in existence before, in my opinion, from other videos I've done to show that he was in existence before anything was created. But in this particular moment here, it's just saying that he was hidden before the Father in the presence of his might, and as it says at the last here, and revealed him, the Son revealed him to the elect. And the congregation of the elect and the holy shall be sown, and all the elect shall stand before him on that day. And all the kings and the mighty and the exalted and those who rule the earth shall fall down before him on their faces and worship and set their hope upon that Son of Man and petition him and supplicate for mercy at his hands. This is a direct parallel to what we just saw with Psalm chapter 2, verses 6 through 12, that Yahweh has set up his king, his Son, upon Zion. This is what was always prophesied for the Son, the same Son that is said to have existed with the Father since the beginning. This was always the purpose for the Messiah, to come and be a king and a high priest at the same time, which in Hebrew culture, according to the Torah, God's law is eternal law. That would make him a ruler over the people and a father in authority over the people. Just as a father over an immediate family is supposed to be, according to the Creator, is supposed to be the authority figure over that family. So I just want to encourage folks that there's context here, right? When we look at Isaiah 9, 6 through 7, and it says that he's mighty God, eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Well, this doesn't mean that there's some sort of duality happening. There's some sort of shared existence, right? Where it's the same being just manifested as a son in a human body, right? Which is kind of even though I refer to it as Hebrew roots oneness, in the traditional Catholic doctrine, that would be called a Trinitarian modalism view. But ultimately, this idea is not, both of those ideas, whatever you want to call them, whatever fancy name you want to give them, it's not the scriptural prophecy. The scriptural prophecy is that the Son who existed with the Father, sent to be in human form, lives, dies, resurrected, right? And his sacrifice, it becomes the thing that earns him his position that we're reading about, right? Because he was faithful even unto death on a cross. So therefore, through his suffering, he learned obedience. This is Hebrews 5, 7 through 10. So he can be made high priest forever, which a priest rules. And this is what the prophecies were about the Son, was that he was to be made king and ruler, just as we've been reading, as well as a high priest. And then in that cultural idiom, he's called a father. So let's review real quick. What did we learn? We learned Yahweh said he would make his Son the king and the ruler. We learned that Paul affirms that this prophecy from Psalm 2 is about Yeshua, the Son of Yahweh, in his speech in Acts 13. We also learned Genesis and Job also use the term father as an idiom for a king and a ruler over the people. And then we learned that Hebrew translators of the Greek Septuagint didn't even use the idiom eternal father in this same Isaiah 9 passage. So I just want to encourage everyone. This particular verse is used a lot to push a Trinitarian mindset, and also with other Hebrew roots communities, it's used to push this idea of oneness doctrine, which they also tie into the bride doctrine. So actually, I'm going to have that link, two links actually, so we can understand properly who Yeshua was and who he's prophesied to be, and the purpose of his role to become our high priest. And it wasn't to marry us. Okay, that's another doctrine that I've already tried to expound upon in great detail over the past couple of years. That is not scripturally sound. So there's I cover that in the videos linked below. I'm gonna so far in this video we've already talked about who is the Almighty. I'll have that link below. Identity crisis averted. That explains to you why we're not married to Yeshua, but instead he's our high priest and we're presented to him so he can present us to the Father at the resurrection. I explain that in Identity Crisis Averted and in The Bride Part 1 and 2. I'll have all those linked below. I appreciate you guys joining me on Morning Cup of Context. If you guys want to take these 6-week courses we're doing on December 15th, also that information is in the link below. You can go to the places to either email me or message me on social media, and I can give you all the information about that. Those are going to be really fun. We already did a first round of those. This time we're going to be doing the Gospel of the Kingdom as Yeshua taught it, as well as the Book of Enoch. So 2 different 6-week courses, and we're doing video conferences every week with the people that are involved, asking questions, going over the scriptures. It's going to be a lot of fun, and you're welcome to check that out if you're interested. Thank you for joining me, and just remember, context creates comprehension. Have a good day.